Milford, Nebraska. Population 3,247. A town lost amid endless plains where wheat fields stretch to the horizon and the nearest large city is 2 hours away. A place where everyone knows everyone else, where scandals are whispered through church pews and the counter of the only grocery store. Here, reputations are built over decades and destroyed overnight. October paints the streets in golden hues. The wind blows dry leaves across the deserted sidewalk in front of the county sheriff's office, a one-story brick building built in the 1960s. Thomas Raymond sits at a worn wooden desk, reviewing reports of minor offenses from the past week. He is 45 years old, 20 of which he has spent in uniform. He is a tall, strongly built man with graying temples and deep wrinkles around his tired brown eyes. His hands are large and calloused from working on a ranch in his youth, before he chose a career in law enforcement. In Milford, he is known as an honest man, fair but strict. The kind of guy who never raises his voice, but a single glance from him is enough to calm any troublemaker. Sheriff, Billy Walker is drunk again and causing trouble at Murphy's, reports Deputy Robert Clark, entering the office with a steaming cup of coffee and a folder of documents. Thomas doesn't look up from his papers. His handwriting is neat and small, a habit from his time in the military. Send him home. His wife will pick him up, like always. He says he won't do it again. He says that every time. Thomas puts down his pen and rubs his nose. Robert, you've been married for 17 years. How can you tell that something's wrong with your wife? The deputy raises his eyebrows in surprise. In all his years on the job, Thomas has never talked about his personal life. What happened? I don't know. That's the problem. Routine. 20 years of the same routine. Drunken fights on Saturdays, family scandals, petty theft, stray cattle on the roads. The most serious crime in the last 5 years was the theft of a tractor from Farmer Johnson, and even then the thief turned out to be his own nephew. Thomas sometimes wondered if he had chosen the wrong profession, dreaming of a career in the army. 4 blocks from the sheriff's office, in an old red brick library building with a faded sign, Sarah Raymond arranges returned books on the shelves. 38 years old, light brown hair that she always wears in a simple bun, a tired but still attractive face with barely noticeable wrinkles at the corners of her green eyes. She had been working here for 15 years, ever since she and Thomas got married and she left her job at a bank in Omaha. Back then it seemed romantic. Life in a small town, a sheriff for a husband, a cozy house, children running around the garden. The children never came. The doctors shrugged their shoulders, talking about compatibility, stress, age, and the years went by. Mrs. Raymond, you haven't forgotten that we have a book club meeting today, have you? Asks elderly Mrs. Cotton, a regular visitor to the library. 70 years old, a widow, she lives on memories of her late husband and gossip about her neighbors. Of course, Mrs. Cotton, 6 o'clock as usual, Sarah replies, trying to hide her irritation. The book club. 10 elderly ladies discussing romance novels and complaining about young people, high prices, and how everything has changed for the worse. Another routine in her predictable life. Sarah goes to the window and looks out at the main street. It's deserted, as always on a weekday. A few cars at the post office, a farmer's pickup truck near the hardware store. The horizon is lost in the haze of autumn fog. Once, this vastness had appealed to her, seemed like a symbol of freedom. Now she felt trapped in this space, like a beautiful but cramped cage. On the outskirts of town, in a small auto repair shop with a faded Wood & Sons sign, Kevin Wood lies under the hood of an old Ford pickup truck. 42 years old, wiry, with calloused hands, and a short blonde beard streaked with gray. His eyes are blue and smiling, even when his face is serious. He was divorced 3 years ago. His wife couldn't stand life in a small town and took their 2 children to Lincoln. Now he only sees Emma and Jake on weekends when he can make it to the capital. The children are 10 and 8 years old and are quickly getting used to city life, and each visit reminds him how much he misses them. Kevin, you've got a customer, his assistant Jerry shouts from the garage. The guy is 23, a local, working here after the army. Kevin climbs out from under the hood and wipes his hands on his worn blue overalls. Sarah Raymond is standing at the counter with the keys to her white Honda Civic. The car isn't new, but it's well maintained, like everything else in her life. Hi, Sarah. What's the problem? The car's been making a strange noise, especially when I turn right, she explains, and Kevin notices that she's avoiding his gaze. They've known each other for years. Milford is too small not to know everyone. They even dated for a few months in high school, but that was a long time ago, in another life. But in recent months, Kevin has noticed that Sarah has been coming into the shop more often, to have her brakes checked, to change the oil, or just to ask how the kids are doing. "I'll take a look this afternoon. Can you come by around 5? "Sure, thanks." Sarah lingers at the door, fiddling with the strap of her purse. "Kevin, do you ever regret your choice? Staying in Milford?" The question catches him off guard. He puts the wrench on the workbench and turns to her. "Sometimes, especially when the kids call and tell me about things I didn't see. You?" "All the time," she replies quietly and quickly leaves, leaving behind a faint scent of perfume. At St. Matthew's Church, a white wooden building with a tall bell tower, Reverend David Morgan is preparing for evening service. 50 years old, gray hair, kind gray eyes behind steel-rimmed glasses. He has served in Milford for 25 years, baptized half the town, married couples, and buried the dead. He knows every family's secrets, keeps confessions, and never gossips. This morning, Sarah Raymond came to see him. She sat in the front row, looked at the crucifix, and talked about how she felt lost, how life was passing her by like a train passing a small station. David had seen this before, a midlife crisis, especially painful in a small town where the choices are limited to working at the bank, the school, the library, or moving away. "Father Morgan, may I come in?" Thomas Raymond peeks through the church door. He takes off his sheriff's hat and holds it in his hands. "Of course, Tom. Have a seat." Thomas sits down on the pew looking tired and confused. He has had a long day dealing with a shoplifting incident, searching for Farmer Miller's missing cow, and paperwork. "David, I don't know what's going on. Sarah's been acting strange. She's silent at dinner, staring out the window as if she's waiting for someone. We used to talk about everything, plan vacations, discuss the news. Now it's like we live in the same house but in different worlds." Reverend Morgan chooses his words carefully. In the morning, Sarah said the same thing, about the gap between them, about loneliness in marriage. "Marriages go through different stages, Tom. Maybe you should spend more time together? Go somewhere together?" "I tried. I suggested we go to Colorado, to the mountains like we used to. She said she had too much work at the library." Thomas twirls his hat in his large hands. "I've been reading people for 20 years. I can tell when someone is lying or hiding something, but my own wife has become a mystery to me." In the evening, at the Raymond's house on Maple Street, Sarah sets the table. It's a 2-story house built in the 1950s, with a porch and a swing that they haven't used in a long time. It's a typical dinner: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green salad. Thomas comes home at exactly 6:30 as usual. He takes off his gun, locks it in the safe in the hall, and washes his hands in the kitchen. "How was work?" he asks, sitting down at the table. "Fine. We had book club today. We discussed the new Nicholas Sparks novel." "Did you like it?" The usual love story. Silence. The sound of forks on porcelain plates. The ticking of an old clock on the mantelpiece. They used to be able to talk for hours, make plans, laugh at the local news. Now every dinner was a test of endurance. "Sarah, we really need to talk. I feel like I'm losing you." She looks up from her plate, and for a moment, he sees something in her eyes that makes his heart ache. Guilt? Fear? Regret? What is there to talk about, Tom? We've been together for 15 years. Everything's been clear for a long time. But we love each other, don't we? We're happy, aren't we? The pause drags on. Too long, a deadly pause. "Of course," she finally replies, but her voice sounds as if she's reading from a script. After dinner, Thomas turns on the TV. Local news, weather forecast, commercials. Sarah washes the dishes by the window, looking out at the dark street. A dog barks somewhere. A lone car drives by. A typical evening in a typical small-town family. But something has changed. Something intangible, but fundamental. Thomas senses it with all his instincts, honed by years of service. A lie has taken root in the house, and it is growing like a crack in a wall after an earthquake. A week passed in deceptive calm. Milford went about its measured life. Farmers prepared for winter, school children wrote tests, elderly ladies gathered at the church for a charity bazaar. But beneath this familiar routine, changes were brewing that would soon shake the entire town. Thomas stood at the window of his office, watching the few passers-by on Main Street. He had hardly slept in the last few days, analyzing his wife's every word, every glance. His experience as a police officer told him that people don't change their behavior for no reason. There is always a reason. "Sheriff, you're on the phone." Robert handed him the receiver. "Thomas Raymond speaking." "Tom, it's Frank Miller. My cattle are missing again. 3 calves from the corral by the old road." "When did you notice?" "This morning. The fence is intact, the lock isn't broken. It's as if they walked away." Thomas jotted down the details in his notebook. Petty thefts had become more frequent in recent months. Usually it meant that someone in the community was in financial trouble. "I'll be there in half an hour." On the way to Miller's farm, he passes Kevin Wood's auto repair shop. A familiar white Honda is parked at the entrance, Sarah's car. Thomas slows down involuntarily. Through the open garage door, he can see Kevin explaining something to his wife, gesturing with his dirty hands. Sarah listens attentively, even with an interest that Thomas hasn't seen in her for months. A strange feeling tightens his chest. Jealousy? Suspicion? He's known Kevin Wood his whole life, an honest, hard-working man and a good father who's been through a divorce. But why has Sarah been going to see him so often? She's been to the repair shop 4 times in the last month. That's a lot for a Honda that's only 3 years old. Thomas steps on the gas and drives on, but the image of his wife and the mechanic sticks in his mind like a splinter. Meanwhile, in the garage, Sarah watches Kevin check the oil level in her car. His movements are confident and professional. On his wrist is a tattoo of his children's names in beautiful lettering. "The car is in perfect condition," he says, lowering the hood. "The bearing is a little noisy, but it's not critical. It can go another year." "Thanks." Sarah is in no hurry to leave. The garage smells of motor oil and metal, but it doesn't bother her. There is a working atmosphere here, far removed from the quiet of the library and the predictability of home. "How are the kids?" she asks. Kevin's face immediately softens. "Emma's doing dance. Jake's on the school baseball team. I'm going to see them play this weekend. That's far away, every weekend in Lincoln. It's worth it. They're growing up fast. I don't want to miss it." He wipes his hands on a rag and looks at her intently. "How are you? With Tom?" The question hangs in the air. Sarah realizes she's standing on the threshold. The answer will determine whether their relationship remains within the bounds of normal client courtesy or develops into something more. "We've grown apart. I don't know when it started, but now we're more like roommates than husband and wife." Kevin nods understandingly. "After my divorce, I realized that most marriages are based on habit, not love. People are afraid of change." "Weren't you afraid?" "I was, but I was even more afraid of living my whole life without really living." Their eyes meet, and Sarah feels something stir inside her. It had been a long time since she had felt this way. A man's interest in her as a woman, not as a wife, a librarian, a housewife. "I have to go," she says hurriedly and heads for the exit. "Sarah." His voice stops her at the door. "If you ever want to talk, just talk. I often work late." She nods without turning around and quickly gets into her car. That evening, Reverend Morgan is preparing for the evening service. The church is almost empty. A few elderly parishioners, Farmer Johnson and his wife, a young couple with a small child. A typical scene for a weekday evening. After the service, Mrs. Cotton approaches him. "Father Morgan, can I talk to you?" They go into his small office behind the altar. Mrs. Cotton is clearly upset, fidgeting with the beads around her neck. "I don't want to gossip, but I'm worried about Sarah Raymond. She's become so distracted, distant. Last week at the book club, we were discussing a novel about marital fidelity, and she suddenly got up and left, saying she wasn't feeling well." David Morgan chooses his words carefully. "People go through different periods in their lives, Mrs. Cotton. Don't jump to conclusions. But I saw her at Kevin Wood's auto shop several times, and her car is almost new." The pastor sighs. In a small town, there are no secrets, only the illusion of them. Maybe there really is something wrong with the car. Maybe, Mrs. Cotton doesn't look convinced. But Kevin Wood is an attractive man, recently divorced, and Sarah is a beautiful woman in her prime, and her marriage is clearly in crisis. After the parishioner left, David sat in his office for a long time, thinking about human nature. In his 25 years of service, he had seen families destroyed, betrayal eat away at hearts, and one wrong step change destinies forever. And it always started the same way, with innocent conversations, chance encounters, glances that lingered a little longer than necessary. The next day, Thomas was patrolling the outskirts of town. The missing livestock case was proving more complicated than it had seemed. The tracks led to the old abandoned Harrison farm, but there was no one there. Someone had clearly been using the place as a staging area. On his way back to town, he drove past the service station again. This time, Sarah's car wasn't there, but he noticed Kevin standing at the entrance, smoking and looking toward the center of town. Something about his posture seemed familiar to Thomas. It was the way men stood when they were waiting for a woman. At home, over dinner, Thomas decided to be direct. "Sarah, are you having car trouble again?" She looked up from her plate, momentarily confused. "What? No, everything's fine. I just saw your Honda at Kevin Wood's place." "Oh yes, oil change, routine maintenance. But you had the oil changed a month ago. I remember the receipt." Pause. Sarah puts down her fork and looks at her husband. "Tom, what is this interrogation?" "It's not an interrogation. I'm just curious. The car is my responsibility. I take care of it myself." There is irritation in her voice, which Thomas hears more and more often. She never used to snap back or defend herself so aggressively. "Okay, I just wanted to help." "I don't need your help." The rest of dinner is spent in heavy silence. Thomas realizes that something has broken between them, but he doesn't know how to fix it. On Friday evening, while Thomas is working late on reports, Sarah goes to the supermarket for groceries. She usually does her shopping during the day, but today she found an excuse to get out of the house. The road to the store passes by a car repair shop. The lights are still on in the garage. Kevin is working on an old Chevrolet, music playing on the radio. Sarah parks at the curb and walks toward the garage. "You're working late," she says from the doorway. Kevin gets up from under the hood and smiles. "Trying to finish before the weekend. I want to get to the kids early tomorrow." "Can I come in?" "Sure." She enters the garage and looks around. On the walls are calendars with cars, family photos, and auto mechanic diplomas. It smells of oil, gasoline, and something else. A man's work that is not found in her neat house. "Want some coffee? I have a thermos." They sit down on old boxes and drink strong black coffee from plastic cups. The radio plays quietly, old rock ballads. "Tell me about your children," Sarah asks. Kevin's face lights up. He takes out his phone and shows her photos. A girl with blonde pigtails and a dance costume. A boy in a baseball uniform with a bat in his hands. "Emma wants to be a ballerina. Jake dreams of playing in the major leagues. Typical childhood dreams." "You miss them." "Every day. But the divorce was the right decision. Their mother deserves better than a life in Milford with a car mechanic." "And you? Do you deserve happiness?" He looks at her intently. "Probably, but I don't know what that is." "I don't know either." Sarah puts the cup on the workbench. 15 years ago, I thought I knew. A husband, a house, stability. But it turned out to be not happiness, but existence. What changed? I changed, or finally understood who I really am. They sit in silence, listening to the radio. The tension between them grows so thick you could cut it with a knife. Sarah realizes she is on the brink. One more step and there will be no turning back. "I have to go," she says, getting up. "Sarah." Kevin also stands up and comes closer. "What you said about not knowing what happiness is, I didn't know for a long time either. But when you come here, I remember." The distance between them shrinks to a few inches. Sarah can smell his cologne, feel the warmth of his body. Her heart is beating so loudly that he must be able to hear it. "Kevin, I know. You're married. You have a different life. But if you ever want to change something..." He doesn't finish his sentence. He leans in and kisses her, lightly, gently, giving her a chance to pull away. But Sarah doesn't pull away. For the first time in years, she feels alive, desired, real. The kiss lasts only a few seconds, but it changes everything. When they pull apart, Sarah sees the same shock in his eyes that she feels in her own. "I really have to go," she whispers and quickly leaves, leaving him alone in the garage. She sits in the car for several minutes, trying to calm down. Her hands are shaking, her heart is pounding. She knows she has crossed a line, that everything will be different now. And the scariest thing is that she doesn't regret it. At home, Thomas is already asleep. Sarah quietly goes into the bathroom and looks at herself in the mirror. Her face is flushed, her eyes are shining. She looks like she hasn't looked in years, like a woman, not someone's wife. Falling asleep next to her husband, she thinks about Kevin, about his hands, his voice, the way he looked at her. And she realizes that tomorrow she will definitely find a reason to go back to him. Saturday dawned gray and rainy. Kevin left early in the morning for Lincoln to see the children, leaving the garage closed for the weekend. Sarah drove past the car repair shop several times, slowing down each time at the empty parking lot. The absence of his car caused a strange feeling of loss, as if something important had disappeared from her world. At home, Thomas was working in the garage, repairing an old lawnmower. It was a normal weekend activity, but today he was working with particular fervor, trying to drown out his disturbing thoughts. Yesterday's conversation with his wife about the car was still on his mind. In 20 years of service, he had learned to read people, and all his instincts were screaming that Sarah was hiding something. "Tom, dinner's ready," Sarah called from the kitchen. They ate in tense silence at the table. Thomas stole glances at his wife. She looked distracted, often staring out the window, mechanically stirring the soup in her bowl. Her cheeks were unhealthily flushed, and her eyes shone with some kind of inner fire. "Any plans for today?" he asked. "I want to go to Lincoln, do some shopping. I haven't been there in a long time. I'll keep you company." "No, don't bother. I know you wanted to finish mowing the lawn. I can do it later." "Tom, please." Her voice sounded irritated. "Sometimes I just want to be alone." After lunch, Sarah did indeed drive to Lincoln, but not to go shopping. She knew for sure that Kevin would be at his son's baseball game. Finding the school team in town was easy. She just had to follow the signs to the sports complex. The game was in full swing. Sarah parked at the edge of the lot and watched for a while. Parents sat in the stands. Fans cheered, encouraging the kids. It was a typical Saturday afternoon in an American town. Kevin stood at the edge of the field, watching the game. Next to him was a slender woman with short dark hair, his ex-wife. They were talking quietly, and it was clear from their posture that they remained on friendly terms. A little further away, a girl of about 10 was playing, Emma, Kevin's daughter. Sarah looked at this family scene and felt her heart ache. This was real life. Children, a family, albeit broken by divorce, but with the most important thing intact, love. And what did she have? An empty house, a husband who had long since become a stranger, and a job that brought her no joy. A boy in a uniform with the number 7 ran up to Kevin. It was Jake. Kevin hugged his son, said something to him, and the boy laughed. Then Jake waved to his mother, who smiled and waved back. At that moment, Kevin turned and saw a familiar car in the parking lot. Their eyes met across the crowd, and Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. She started the car and drove away without waiting for the game to end. On Sunday evening, Sarah sat in her usual place in the third row of the church. The service proceeded as usual, but she wasn't listening to Reverend Morgan's words. Her thoughts were far away, at the auto repair shop where Kevin would be working again tomorrow. After the service, Mrs. Cotton approached her. "Sarah, dear, how are you? You look pale." "I'm fine, Mrs. Cotton, just tired. Working at the library shouldn't be so exhausting. Or is there trouble at home?" The old woman leaned closer and lowered her voice. "You know, marriages go through rough patches. The important thing is not to do anything stupid." Sarah felt her face flush. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course, dear. Just remember, in a small town, everyone knows everything. And reputation is all we have." Home, Sarah drove home with a heavy heart. Mrs. Cotton's words had struck a nerve, so people were already talking. That meant her visits to Kevin hadn't gone unnoticed. In Milford, it was impossible to hide anything. Every step, every glance was recorded in the town's collective memory. At home, Thomas was watching football on TV. He looked up when she came in. "How was the service?" "Fine. Father Morgan talked about forgiveness." A timely topic. There was a hint of irony in his voice that made Sarah wary. "What do you mean?" "Nothing in particular. We all need forgiveness sometimes." He turned back to the TV, but Sarah could feel his eyes on her. Did he know something? Or was he just suspicious? Monday started off with trouble. A computer broke down in the library, the cataloging system crashed, and by noon it turned out that a whole series of children's books was missing. Sarah mechanically solved the problems, but her mind was elsewhere. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, she couldn't take it anymore and drove to the car repair shop. She needed a good reason for the visit, so she made up a problem with the air conditioner. It was indeed stuffy in the car, so her lie was almost the truth. Kevin was working under the hood of a truck. Hearing the sound of her car, he straightened up and smiled. He was wearing the same blue overalls, but today they seemed particularly attractive to Sarah. "Problems again?" he asked, approaching her car. "The air conditioner is acting up." He opened the hood and checked the cooling system. His fingers moved confidently, professionally. Sarah looked at his hands and remembered how they had touched her face on Friday night. "Everything's fine. Maybe it just needs some refrigerant." "Thanks." She didn't rush to leave. "How are the kids? How was your weekend?" "Great. Jake scored the winning run. Emma showed me a new dance." He paused, then added quietly, "I saw you in the parking lot." Sarah blushed. "I just wanted to watch." "Watch what?" "Your life. Your real life." Kevin closed the hood and wiped his hands on a rag. "Do you want to talk?" They walked into the garage. Jerry had left early, and they were alone. The radio played softly, and rain fell outside the windows. "Sarah, about what happened on Friday." "Don't explain. I understand." "What do you understand?" "That it was a mistake. That I have a husband and you have children, an ex-wife, another life." Kevin moved closer. "What if I say it wasn't a mistake?" "Then we'll both be in big trouble." "Maybe, but I can't pretend I don't feel anything." Sarah looked up and met his gaze. "What do you feel?" "The same thing you feel when you come here. The same thing that makes you look for excuses to see me." The distance between them was now only a few inches. Sarah could feel his breath, the scent of his skin, soap, and a faint hint of cologne. "Kevin, I can't." "You can. You're just afraid. I have a husband." "But you don't love him." The words hung in the air. Sarah realized he was right. When had it happened? When had her love for Thomas turned into a habit, and the habit into a burden? "I don't know what to do," she whispered. "You do. You're just afraid to admit it to yourself." He took her hands. They were warm, strong, so familiar now. "Sarah, I'm not going to pressure you, but I'm not going to pretend either. I like you. I like you a lot, and not just as a woman, as a person. You make me feel alive. And you make me feel like myself, the real me, not the sheriff's wife, not the librarian, not the model parishioner." They stood there holding hands, and the world around them froze. Rain was falling outside. A car drove by in the distance, but all that existed were the two of them. "What now?" Sarah asked. "I don't know, but I want to find out." He kissed her again, and this time she didn't resist. The kiss was long, passionate, full of despair and hope at the same time. When they pulled apart, Sarah realized that there was no turning back. At that moment, a car braked in the parking lot. They heard a door slam and footsteps on the gravel. Sarah jumped away from Kevin, her heart pounding wildly. Thomas entered the garage. Time stood still. 3 people stared at each other, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. Thomas glanced around the garage, lingered on his wife's face, then looked at Kevin. "Car trouble?" he asked in an even voice. "The air conditioner," Sarah said. Kevin checked it. "I see." Thomas walked over to her Honda and looked under the hood. "Looks fine." "It is. Just a minor problem with the coolant," Kevin said, trying to sound normal. Thomas nodded, continuing to inspect the car. His face was impassive, but Sarah knew her husband well enough to notice the tension in his shoulders and his clenched fists. "Will it be expensive?" the sheriff asked. $50. Fair enough. Thomas turned to his wife. "Sarah, will you drive home? I need to discuss something with Kevin." There was a command in his voice that brooked no argument. Sarah realized that her husband suspected something, perhaps even saw them kissing. Of course. She took the keys with trembling hands. "See you at home." As she pulled out of the parking lot, she saw Thomas and Kevin standing in the garage in the rearview mirror. Both looked tense, ready for a confrontation. At home, Sarah paced around the house, unable to find a place for herself. What had Thomas said to Kevin? What had Kevin replied? How much did they know? How much did they suspect? An hour later, Thomas returned. He entered the house, hung up his hat and gun, and went into the kitchen. His face was stony, his eyes cold. "What were you talking about?" Sarah couldn't hold back. "Work. He had some questions about the car repair shop license." A lie. She knew it was a lie, but she didn't dare insist. "Tom, if you suspect something, what should I suspect?" The direct question caught her off guard. She could lie, deny everything, go back to her old life, or tell the truth and ruin everything for good. "Nothing," she whispered. "Okay." Thomas sat down at the table and took out a notepad. "Then explain to me why you've been to Kevin Wood's house 7 times in the last month." I checked. Her heart sank. "Have you been following me?" "I'm a police officer, Sarah. I noticed suspicious behavior." "Suspicious?" Her voice broke into a scream. "I'm your wife, not a suspect." "Then act like one." They stared at each other, and between them lay the gaping chasm of 15 years of marriage slowly dying. "Tom, we need to talk. Seriously talk." "About what?" "About us. About how we've become strangers. We've always been a family." "No, we were convenient for each other. You got a wife who cooks, cleans, and doesn't cause any trouble. I got a husband who provides, protects, and is respected in the town. But there's been no love between us for a long time." Thomas was silent for a long time, digesting her words. "And what do you suggest?" "Honesty. Let's admit that we're unhappy." "I'm not unhappy." "That's not true. You're just afraid to admit it." "And you? Are you happy with Kevin Wood?" The question sounded like a gunshot. Sarah realized there was no point in pretending anymore. "I don't know. But with him, I feel alive." "And with me, you feel dead?" "Not dead. Just not myself." Thomas stood up and walked over to the window. Outside, the autumn night was dark. 15 years, Sarah. For 15 years, I thought we were happy. We were content. That's not the same thing. I was. And now? He turned to her. In his eyes, she saw pain she had never noticed before. "Now I don't know who you are. My wife wouldn't have an affair with another man. I'm not seeing him, but you want to." The pause dragged on. Sarah knew that the next words would determine their fate. "Yes," she whispered. "I do." Thomas nodded as if he had been expecting that answer. "Then we really have nothing to talk about." He left the kitchen, and Sarah heard his study door slam shut. She was left alone with the realization that she had just destroyed her marriage. In his study, Thomas sat in his chair, staring at their wedding photo. Young, happy, full of hope. When had everything changed? When had they become strangers? He took out his phone and found the number of a private investigator in Omaha. If his wife had decided to cheat on him, he needed to know the whole truth. He would need proof to get a divorce. But before he pressed the call button, he stopped. Was he ready for the truth? Was he ready to destroy everything for good? The phone remained on the table. Meanwhile, at the auto repair shop, Kevin couldn't concentrate on his work. The conversation with the sheriff had left a bad taste in his mouth. Thomas Raymond hadn't said anything directly, but the threat was clear in every word, every glance. "Watch out for my wife," was what he wanted to say. "Or you'll be sorry." Kevin realized that the game was getting dangerous. The sheriff was not a man to be underestimated. He had power, connections, and the ability to make an unwelcome person's life very difficult. But when he thought of Sarah, of her eyes, of the way she kissed him, all his fears receded. He couldn't just give up the only happiness that had come into his life since his divorce. Tomorrow, he would find a way to see her. They had to decide what to do next, because after today, there were no more secrets. Changes were coming to the town that would shake the foundations of Milford's quiet life. And at the center of these changes was a triangle of three people, each facing a choice that would determine not only their fate, but the fate of the entire town. Tuesday, October 15th, a day that would forever change the history of Milford. The morning began deceptively calm. Thomas left for work earlier than usual, without breakfast and without saying a word to his wife. Sarah heard him walking around the house, getting ready, then the front door slammed, and the sound of his car faded into the morning silence. She sat in the kitchen with a cup of cold coffee, staring out the window at the empty street. Yesterday's conversation had dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's. The marriage was over, and there was no going back. Strangely, instead of grief, she felt relief. Finally, she could stop pretending, stop playing the role of the happy wife. At 8 in the morning, a friend from the library called. Mary was sick, and Sarah was asked to come in early. She agreed, knowing that she couldn't stand to be at home today. The day at the library dragged on. There were few visitors and little work to do. Sarah mechanically arranged books and answered the occasional question, but her mind was elsewhere. She needed to see Kevin and discuss what to do next. After Thomas's visit to the car repair shop yesterday, their relationship was no longer a secret. At 1 o'clock, she couldn't stand it anymore and called Kevin. Wood's Auto Service. It's Sarah. We need to talk. I know. Listen, I'm leaving for Omaha tonight to get some parts. Meet me at the old mill at 7. The old mill stood 5 miles outside of town on an abandoned farm. It was a secluded spot, far from prying eyes. Okay. Sarah, your husband wasn't very friendly yesterday. He knows. I told him. A long pause. Is that all? Not all, but enough. See you at 7 then. Meanwhile, at the sheriff's office, Thomas was studying documents from an old case, but the letters blurred before his eyes. He had hardly slept all night, replaying yesterday's conversation with his wife in his head. I want to be with him. Those words rang in his ears like an alarm bell. In 20 years of service, he had seen many broken families and knew how betrayal could eat away at people from the inside. But he never thought it would happen to him. Thomas Raymond, a respected sheriff and model husband, and a cuckold. Soon the whole town would know. Sheriff, we have a problem. Deputy Clark burst into the office with papers in his hands. What is it? Farmer Johnson found another bull calf slaughtered. That's the 3rd one this month. Looks like we have a skinner on our hands. Thomas looked up from his papers. Where? At the northern border of his property. Same thing. Professional butchery. No traces. I'm on it. Thomas stood up and put on his hat. Work was the only thing that could distract him from his family problems. At Johnson's farm, he was met with a familiar sight. A young bull lay at the edge of the field, neatly butchered. Someone with expertise had taken the best cuts of meat, leaving the rest for the crows to tear apart. Tom, this is getting serious. Farmer Johnson was agitated. 3 heads in a month is serious money. Thomas examined the scene. Tire tracks led to an old road that ran past an abandoned mill to the highway. Professional work, no loose ends. I'll put extra patrols on it, he promised the farmer. On his way back to town, Thomas thought about the cattle theft. Someone local was definitely involved. They knew the area too well, the farmers' habits, the location of the herds. But right now, his mind was preoccupied with other things. At home, he found a note from Sarah. Running late at work, dinner's in the fridge. Short, businesslike, without the usual kisses or love, the new reality of their relationship. At 6 in the evening, Sarah closed the library and drove home to change. Thomas wasn't there. Maybe he was stuck at work. Maybe he didn't want to see her. She put on jeans and a sweater and grabbed her jacket. It was getting chilly outside. Autumn was setting in. She drove along country roads to the old mill, trying not to think about what she was doing. Ahead of her lay uncertainty, divorce, scandal, condemnation by the whole town. But there was also hope for a new life, for the happiness she had been deprived of for 15 years. The mill stood on a hill, surrounded by old oak trees. Once upon a time, life had been bustling here, but now only ruins remained of the farm. Kevin's pickup truck was already in the parking lot. Sarah parked next to it and walked toward the building. Kevin was waiting for her inside, by the old millstone. He looked agitated and nervous. "Thanks for coming." "We need to talk," Sarah said, moving closer. "Sarah, after talking to your husband yesterday, I realized we're playing with fire." "Are you afraid?" "I'm afraid for you. Thomas Raymond isn't the kind of man who lets people go. What can he do? We live in a civilized world." Kevin smiled sadly. "You know what they say, the sheriff's arms are long. He can make my life very difficult." "Then what do you suggest?" "Let's leave, together, tonight." The proposal took her by surprise. "Where?" "Denver. I have a friend there who can help me find work. We'll start a new life." Sarah looked at him, trying to comprehend the magnitude of his proposal. Leave everything behind, her home, her job, the city where she had lived half her life. Start over at 40 with a man she had known for only a few months. "Kevin, I know it's crazy, but what do we have here? Secret meetings, constant lies, fear of being exposed. There we could be together for real." He took her hands and looked into her eyes. "Sarah, I'm serious about you. This isn't just a fling. I want you to be part of my life." "What about the kids?" "I'll take them with me as soon as I get settled. Linda won't mind. She's having a hard time on her own." The plan sounded realistic, feasible. A new life, new opportunities, freedom from the past. "When?" "Tonight. Just pack the essentials. We can buy the rest when we get there." Sarah hesitated. Part of her wanted to agree immediately, but another part was terrified by the magnitude of the decision. "I need time to think." "There's no time. After yesterday, your husband will be watching our every move." At that moment, they heard the sound of an approaching car. Kevin looked out the window and turned pale. "Your husband!" Sarah ran to the window. A sheriff's SUV was driving toward the mill, slowly, confidently, like a predator stalking its prey. "How did he find us?" "I don't know. Maybe he was following us." The car stopped next to theirs. Thomas got out, put on his hat, and looked around. A gun hung from his belt. His face was stony, his eyes cold. "What are we going to do?" Sarah whispered. "Nothing. We haven't done anything wrong. We're just talking." Thomas entered the mill. His boots echoed on the wooden floor. He stopped in the doorway, glanced around the room, and lingered on his wife and her lover. "Strange place for a conversation," he said calmly. "Tom, it's not what you think," Sarah began. "What do I think?" "We're just planning to run away." Thomas took a folded piece of paper out of his pocket. "Bus tickets to Denver." Kevin left them in his pickup. Sarah felt the ground slip away from under her feet. Thomas knew everything. "How long have you been watching us?" Kevin asked. "Long enough." The sheriff stepped closer. "You know, Kevin, cattle rustling is a serious crime in Nebraska." "What are you talking about?" 3 of Farmer Johnson's steers were slaughtered. The tracks lead straight to this mill, and you happen to be here a lot. "You're out of your mind. I didn't steal anything." "Prove it. Do you have an alibi for last weekend?" Kevin realized he was trapped. "I was in Lincoln with my kids." "All night from Saturday to Sunday?" "No, but..." "So you could have come here, slaughter the cattle, cut them up, and sell the meat in Omaha." "Tom, stop," Sarah interrupted. "You know that's not true." "No?" Thomas turned to his wife. "I don't know anything. My wife is seeing another man planning to run away with him. She may even be involved in crimes." "That's absurd. Then explain what you're doing here." Sarah realized her husband had backed them into a corner. Any explanation would sound like an admission of infidelity. "Okay," she said quietly. "We were seeing each other, and we were planning to leave." "Finally, the truth." Thomas nodded with satisfaction. "That means I have grounds for divorce." "Tom, let's talk about this at home. Calm down." "Calm down?" The sheriff's voice rose. 15 years of marriage, Sarah. 15 years I thought we had a good life. We didn't have a good life. We were just pretending. I wasn't pretending. I loved you. Loved me or got used to me? Thomas took a step toward her, his face contorted with pain and rage. So you've been lying all this time? Every day, every night? Tom, calm down, Kevin intervened, stepping between them. Don't you dare tell me what to do. The sheriff turned to him. You destroyed my family. Nobody destroyed anything. Things just changed. Changed? Thomas laughed hysterically. My wife is having an affair with the local mechanic, and that's just changed? Tom, we're adults. Sarah tried to reason with him. We can work this out civilly. Civilly? While the whole town laughs behind my back. No one is laughing. No? What about Mrs. Cotton? And the others? You think I haven't seen the looks? Heard the whispers? The atmosphere was reaching boiling point. Thomas paced around the room like a caged animal. Sarah and Kevin stood against the wall, ready for the worst. You know what, Sarah? The sheriff finally said. If you want to leave with him, go ahead. But you're leaving with nothing. The house, the car, all the property is mine. You cheated on me, so you forfeit your right to alimony. Tom. And one more thing. Mr. Wood is now under investigation for cattle theft. His auto repair shop will be thoroughly inspected. License, taxes, safety. One mistake and he's in jail. You can't do that, Kevin said. I can, and I will. Thomas headed for the door, but stopped at the doorway. You have an hour, Sarah. 1 hour to make your choice. Either you come back home and we pretend nothing happened, or you leave, but then I'll make you regret it. He left, slamming the door behind him. The sound of his car gradually faded into the evening silence. Sarah and Kevin were left alone. They were silent for a long time, realizing the magnitude of the disaster. What are we going to do? Sarah finally asked. Leave, right now. But he said, he's bluffing. He's trying to scare us. What if he's not bluffing? Kevin went to the window and looked out at the road. Then we need to be very careful. They quickly gathered their things and went out to their cars. The plan was simple. Sarah would drive home, pack her things, and meet Kevin at a gas station on the outskirts of town. From there, they would drive to Omaha together and take a bus to Denver. See you in an hour, Kevin said, kissing her goodbye. Sarah got into her Honda and drove home along the familiar road. Thoughts of the upcoming changes swirled in her head. It was scary, but also exciting. A new life awaited her on the horizon. She didn't notice the dark truck with no headlights following her. Thomas followed his wife at a distance, fighting rage and despair. Fragments of thoughts, plans, and threats swirled in his head. He had lost everything. His wife, his family, his respect, and all because of that mechanic. The road narrowed at the turn onto the highway. Sarah's Honda was ahead, and Kevin's pickup truck headlights appeared in front of them. Apparently, he had also decided not to wait and had followed her. Thomas stepped on the gas. The truck accelerated and closed in on the Honda. At the last moment, Sarah saw him in the rearview mirror, but it was too late. The impact hit the rear fender. The Honda skidded and flew into the oncoming lane, right under the wheels of Kevin's pickup truck. The sound of the collision echoed throughout the neighborhood. Metal, glass, screams. Then there was silence. Thomas stopped the truck and got out. Both cars were wrecked, smoke billowing from under the hoods. The Honda was lying on its side, Kevin motionless behind the wheel of the pickup. The sheriff approached the accident site, took out his phone, and called an ambulance and the fire department. His voice was calm and professional. Accident on Highway 34, 3 miles from town. 2 cars, there are casualties. He walked around the scene, making sure there were no other witnesses. Then he got into his truck and slowly drove home, leaving behind the lights of the emergency services and the end of his former life. Detective Jessica Hunter arrived in Milford the morning after the tragedy. 34 years old, short, with short dark hair and attentive gray eyes. She had 10 years of experience in the Nebraska State Bureau of Investigation, solving the most difficult cases. She was called in because the accident seemed suspicious to the district attorney. There were too many coincidences. 2 people who were rumored to be having an affair died in the same accident in a deserted place. And the husband of one of the victims was the local sheriff. The scene had been thoroughly documented, but Jessica wanted to examine everything herself. The Honda Civic and Ford pickup truck had been taken to an impound lot, but the marks on the asphalt told their own story. "Strange trajectory," she muttered, studying the skid marks. Deputy Sheriff Robert Clark stood nearby, looking shaken. "Detective, this is a terrible tragedy. Sarah and Kevin were good people. Tell me what you know about their relationship." Robert shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot. Well, there had been rumors lately that they were close. And Sheriff Raymond? How did he feel about those rumors? Tom was taking it hard. He was very tense and nervous yesterday. He said he was having family problems. Jessica wrote this down in her notebook. Where was he at the time of the accident? At home. I called him right after the call, around 9 in the evening. He said he was in his office, working on some paperwork. I see. And where was his truck? What truck? His work truck. A big black Chevrolet. I don't know. Tom sometimes takes it home if he plans to leave early for a call. The atmosphere at the sheriff's office was subdued. Thomas sat in his office filling out paperwork. He looked tired, aged overnight. His eyes were red, his hands trembling slightly. "Sheriff Raymond?" Jessica knocked on the door. "Detective Hunter, State Investigation Division. My condolences. Thank you." His voice was hoarse, as if he had been shouting or crying all night. "Come in." She sat down opposite him and took out her tape recorder. "I need to ask you a few questions. Just a formality." "I understand. When was the last time you saw your wife?" "Yesterday morning. We had an argument. She left for work earlier than usual." "What was the argument about?" Thomas paused, choosing his words carefully. "Personal problems. Our marriage was in crisis." "Related to Kevin Wood?" The direct question made him flinch. "Yes, Sarah was involved with him." "How did you find out?" "I suspected it a few weeks ago. She started going to his service station a lot. Yesterday she confessed." "And how did you react?" "I was angry, of course, but not enough to wish them dead." Jessica studied his face. Thomas looked genuinely devastated, but something about his behavior was disturbing. His emotions seemed too controlled for someone who had lost his wife. "Where were you last night between 7 and 9? "At home, working in my office." "Can anyone confirm that?" "No, I was alone." "And your company truck?" "It was in the garage." "Can I take a look?" A slight pause. "Of course." A black Chevrolet Silverado was parked in the Raymonds' garage. Jessica examined the front carefully. There was no visible damage, but the hood seemed too clean for a work vehicle. "Was it washed recently?" "The day before yesterday. I always keep an eye on the equipment." She took a few photos and wrote down the license plate number. "Thanks for your cooperation, Sheriff." Meanwhile, rumors were spreading around town. At Murphy's Cafe, the only restaurant in Milford, locals gathered to discuss the tragedy. "I told you it wouldn't end well," whispered Mrs. Cotton, sipping her coffee. "I saw her driving over to his place every week." "Poor Tom," sighed Farmer Johnson. 20 years of honest service, and this is how his wife repays him." "But why did they go together?" wondered a young teacher. "If they were having an affair, why so openly?" "Maybe they wanted to run away?" suggested Murphy, the cafe owner. "I heard Kevin was going to Denver for spare parts." The conversation was interrupted by the ringing of St. Matthew's church bells. Reverend Morgan was preparing for a double funeral, an event Milford had never seen in its entire history. In the pastor's office, Detective Hunter was taking statements. "Sarah came to see me a week before she died," Father Morgan said. "She talked about a crisis in her marriage, about feeling trapped." "Did she mention Kevin Wood?" "Not directly, but it was clear that someone else had come into the picture." "What about Thomas Raymond? How did he seem lately?" "Distraught, depressed. He asked me several times for advice on how to save his marriage." "Did he ever threaten his wife, or Wood?" The pastor hesitated. "There were no direct threats, but I could sense the desperation in his words. He was very hurt by the affair." The next day, Jessica received a preliminary report from the forensic expert. Tire marks on the road showed that the Honda was traveling at a normal speed when it was struck from behind by an unknown vehicle. The impact caused it to veer into oncoming traffic and collide with Kevin's pickup truck. A third vehicle, the detective muttered as she studied the diagram. Someone deliberately caused the collision. She returned to Thomas with new questions. Sheriff, the investigation shows that a third vehicle was involved in the accident. A large, heavy vehicle, possibly a truck. Thomas looked calm, but Jessica noticed his jaw tense. I see. Someone must have fled the scene. Or someone deliberately caused the accident. Are you saying this is murder? What do you think? A long pause. Thomas looked out the window at the empty street. I don't know. Anything can happen these days. I need to take a closer look at your truck. Do you have a warrant? I can get one, but it would be better if you gave your consent voluntarily. All right, go ahead. A forensic expert from Omaha arrived with a full set of equipment. The truck was thoroughly examined. Paint samples were taken, micro traces were checked, and scratches on the bumper were photographed. The vehicle was definitely in an accident, the expert reported an hour later. The white paint marks on the front bumper matched the color of the victim's Honda, but someone tried to paint over them. Jessica felt the adrenaline rush through her veins. Enough for an arrest. More than enough. That evening, Detective Hunter arrived at the Raymond home with an arrest warrant. Thomas was sitting in an armchair in the living room, looking at wedding photos. He looked peaceful, almost relieved. Thomas Raymond, you are under arrest on suspicion of murdering 2 people, she said in an official tone. I know. He stood up and held out his hands for the handcuffs. I've been waiting for this moment. You have the right to remain silent. No need. I'm ready to talk. In the interrogation room in Omaha, Thomas sat across from Detective Hunter and the district attorney. The tape recorder was turned on, a lawyer was called in, and all formalities were observed. Tell us what happened that night, Jessica asked. Thomas took a deep breath. I followed them. I knew they were meeting at the old mill. I drove there wanting to talk. And what happened? The conversation was difficult. Sarah said she was leaving with him, that our marriage had been a mistake from the start. How did you react? I was angry. I said I'd give them an hour to think about it. I drove home. But then you went back? Yes, I couldn't calm down. I took the company truck and went back to try to talk Sarah out of it. And you saw them leaving? Yes. Sarah was driving home and Kevin was following her. When I realized they were really going to run away, I lost control. What exactly did you do? Thomas covered his face with his hands. I caught up with Sarah's car. I just wanted to scare her, make her stop. But I misjudged the situation. She drove right into the path of Kevin's pickup truck. Did you realize they could be killed? At that moment, I didn't understand anything. I was in a fog of rage. And then I saw what I had done. I called an ambulance and the police, but it was too late. The prosecutor leaned forward. Why did you try to cover up the traces on the truck? I was scared. I realized I had committed murder. I thought I could cover it up, but my conscience wouldn't let me. Do you regret what you did? Every second of every day. Sarah was right. Our marriage had been dead for a long time, but instead of letting her go, I killed her. News of the sheriff's arrest rocked Milford to its core. The man trusted with the safety of the town was a murderer. At Murphy's Cafe, the talk was no longer about family drama, but about betrayal. 20 years we thought we knew him, Farmer Johnson shook his head. And all this time he was capable of murder. Poor Sarah, Mrs. Cotton cried. She wanted to find happiness and she got death. And Kevin too, someone added. He just fell in love with someone else's wife. Reverend Morgan conducted a double funeral in the crowded church. The whole town came to say goodbye to the victims of the family tragedy. The coffins stood side by side, as if even in death Sarah and Kevin were together. We are not here to judge, said the pastor from the pulpit. We are here to pray for the souls of the deceased and to forgive those who caused them pain. For only forgiveness can heal the wounds inflicted by hatred. Kevin's children, Emma and Jake, sat in the front row with their mother, who had come from Lincoln. The girl cried, clinging to her mother, while the boy sat silently, his fists clenched. After the service, Detective Hunter approached Kevin's ex-wife. Linda Wood, my condolences on your loss. Thank you. Kevin was a good father despite the divorce. Did you know about his relationship with Sarah Raymond? I suspected it. He had changed in recent months. He was happier. He said he had met someone special. Do you regret that he didn't stay with you? Linda shook her head. Our marriage was over long ago. Kevin deserved to be loved. It's just a shame it ended so tragically. The trial of Thomas Raymond was the event of the year in the county. The former sheriff appeared before the judge, pleading guilty to second-degree murder. The defense attorney asked for leniency, citing emotional distress and lack of intent to kill. Your Honor, Thomas said in his final statement, I'm not asking for forgiveness because I know that what I did cannot be forgiven. I took the lives of two people because of my own pride and inability to let go of the past. The only thing I can do now is accept my punishment and live with the burden of what I have done. The sentence was 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. A year passed. Milford gradually returned to his normal life, but the scars from the tragedy remained. Wood and Sons Auto Repair closed down. No one wanted to buy it. The Raymond house was sold at auction, and the money went to the victims' families. Detective Jessica Hunter sometimes came to town on other business, and always stopped by the cemetery. Two graves stood side by side, simple headstones with names and dates. Kevin's children grew up in Lincoln, rarely thinking about the small town where their father died. But sometimes Emma danced to the old songs he loved, and Jake played baseball as if he knew his dad was watching and proud. The story of Thomas, Sarah, and Kevin became a lesson for all the residents of Milford, about how love can both create and destroy, about how jealousy can turn a good person into a murderer, and about how in a small town where everyone knows everyone, there are no secrets, only the illusion of keeping them.